I'm going to attempt to summarise 11 years in about 11 minutes. So many people involved, especially the rice growers, but I do want to single out 4 people. Professor Stephen Garnett and Kirsten Zander from Charles Darwin Uni, Neil Bull from the Rice Growers Association, and Anna Wilson from Riverina Local Land Services, and of course BirdLife. People like Andrew Silcox and Chris Pennell, all of us have come together, and I think we've really done some good stuff over the last decade or so. This bird, the most recent estimate is 1,300 in Australia. There may be about 700 in New Zealand, so you're looking at a species down to about 2,000. After this triple La Nina, I'd like to think that perhaps we've added another couple of hundred birds in Australia. About 3/4 of the population uses the Murray-Darling Basin, and the southern part of the basin in the Riverina is the core area. And as you'll see in a minute, we've got about 750 in the rice. Now, the focus of a lot of people's work, including what we've done in the rice, is about water, whether it's environmental water or managing the water in rice crops for bitterns. But of course, there is a whole lot more to the story. And it's been a huge decade for this species. We now have a national recovery plan, and there's just been some wonderful work done over in WA. They have their own recovery team, and of course across in New Zealand with Emma and Colin O'Donnell. So lots of great stuff happening. Today I'm going to focus on the research, but the community engagement side of things has also been equally central to this Bitterns in Rice work. Lots of media, from First Dog on the Moon to children's books and videos and posters. It's about finding common ground between people that are normally at odds with each other, environmentalists and irrigators, and it's really struck a chord with a lot of people, that notion of farming and the environment working together. I think this quote kind of captures it well for me. This is Milton Hoysted, one of the growers from around Murrumai near Leeton. He says, "We're tweaking the crop to better accommodate the bitterns. People chat about it with a bit of pride. I've got the birds, you haven't. It's turning into a bit of a competition." And I just love that notion that being a food producer is not just about producing food and making a profit, that it's also about being a custodian for a threatened species. Early on, the big question was how many bitterns are there in the rice? And what we did was occupancy modelling, and it might sound really complicated, but you can see those green patches there in the rice because there's so much rice in those wet years. There might be 600 rice farms. We can't sample it, we can't do a census, so we sample it and we see how many of those rice crops are occupied and what the average abundance is, and then extrapolate it. And I won't go into any great detail here, but we figured out that just in the Murrumbidgee and Coleambally irrigation areas, there were around 400 birds at a minimum. And these were just in the early permanent water crops. So we concluded that in most years, there's 500 to 1,000 bitterns in the Riverina's rice crops. And it's this fact that has kept me doing this work, the significance of the population. So it's about 40% of the global total and about 60% of the national total. The next big question was, are they breeding? And this is the very first nest I found. I've since found another 34, but this was number 1. You're looking at it. And in a strange message from the universe, it came from a property in Coleambally called Tarkuri, which is the Wiradjuri word for Australasian bittern. A Tarkuri being the sound that the bittern makes. And this is what we've learnt about the breeding. We know that they lay their eggs usually from around mid to late December and into January, and they do it 77 days after sowing and flooding has occurred. It's when the rice is about 55 centimetres high, the water's about 20 to 30 centimetres deep, and we know that it takes about 80 days from the first egg being laid until all the birds have hatched. All the chicks have hatched. I hope everyone can still hear me. It's a tight window for them to breed successfully before the rice season ends. Oh, I'm sorry, folks. I seem to have frozen. Bear with me.
We can hear you clearly, but
thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, I'm very sorry.
Technology.
Oh, I know. I'll just see if I can start that again. Okay. Can you see that?
I can.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right, mate. Perhaps we're back now. It's a bit rough for a weekend to look at a graph like this, but you can see all the blue dots. We're able to backdate those nests when we find them and figure out when the first egg was laid, and then of course when the last chick fledges. All the ones above the x-axis, they are able to get the chicks away and fledge before the season ends, and they're basically the bitten-friendly rice crops. The ones down the bottom, they're not necessarily doomed, but they're, you know, potentially left high and dry and very vulnerable to predators. So these rice growers trying to save money, the season is contracting, which seems great for the environment to be saving water, but this is one of the trade-offs. We're able to model this across hundreds of different crops and see which ones can potentially be successful. Those red dots there you can see are around 150 days of ponding, and it's commencing around, you know, mid to late October and perhaps the start of November. So this helps us inform our incentive programs and so on. You can see me looking like a pool cleaner there. This is one of the reasons why those traditional crops with that early ponding are so important. They are just loaded with tadpoles and other bitten prey. All the red columns there are the bitten friendly crops, the aerial sown ones that have that early ponding. There's even those southern bell frogs in there, which bittens love to eat. So bitten friendly rice is all about early and sufficient ponding, but we also encourage and incentivize grassy banks, adjacent habitat, fox and cat control, and we've been trialing nesting patches where we add additional fertilizer to get the rice taller and thicker earlier in the season, basically to fast track breeding, to get the birds nesting as soon as possible. Here's one of our great bitten friendly growers, Scott Williams. Instead of just rolling out an incentive program hoping people would take it up, we actually did research, and the paper was published just last year in Land Use Policy. And we asked growers what they wanted in an incentive program, and their in-kind contribution, you can see there, over $500,000, as long as it didn't interfere too much with their regime. That's the sort of in-kind support that they were able to contribute. But those days in October when you're getting the water on, they are critical. Those 11 days, like for example, the difference between the 20th of October and the 31st of October, it's a really big deal for the bitterns and for the growers. Now enter the incentive program. It began in 2019, and we've just had our fourth and final year of funding from the National Land Care Program. We got 3,500 hectares, had at least 16 nests and 2 to 6 times as many bitterns in those incentive sites compared to the controls. We found no nests in the controls, so we know we're on the right track. And there were 3 different levels. They got paid different amounts, $50 or $100 a hectare. But it's all about getting that water on early and making sure there's a sufficient ponding period. This is what a rice crop looks like when the water goes on in October. This is Hayden Cudmore, another fantastic bittern-friendly grower with Anna Wilson from LLS. And 77 days later, there are bitterns out there laying their eggs. Can you believe that? In rice that's 55 centimetres high. Here's some more of the growers looking at the thermal drone, checking out a nest. And here it is here. Hopefully you can see that little chick move. I'll just do it one more time. The thermal drone has been really useful, and about 8 or 9 years ago, I think, the Twitchathon funds helped purchase that, and it's been a game changer with our monitoring. It would be remiss of me to talk about bitterns in rice without mentioning the tracking. This is the famous Robbie. He took us all the way to the coast. We followed him for a year, and it was just an amazing insight. So the rice is great for half the year providing habitat, but we wanted to know where else they went. That's how we caught them, with the mirror in the trap, with the playback on top, with Andrew Silcox and Inca Veltime. It was a really great insight. These are some of the bigger movements that our birds took. They went to those coastal wetlands, but they also stayed local and even used irrigation channels with that brown kumbungi in winter. So there was a mix of habitats. It wasn't complete coastal movement. Now, the very last thing is, will people pay for it? It's great to have government funding, but in the long term, will consumers pay extra for bittern-friendly rice? The short answer is yes, very much so. And we did willingness to pay experiments and had logos and all that sort of stuff to tease out what people were willing to pay for. And I still remain hopeful that Sunrice will develop these products and that you'll see them in Coles and Woolworths. I think my time is up. Thank you to everyone that's made all this work happen. And hopefully I've done some justice to 11 years in probably more than 11 minutes.
Thank you so much, Matt. That's just brilliant. Can you hear me, everybody?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. Fantastic. Look, I found the incentive program idea really, really interesting. Yeah, you know, who can have the most bitterns in their patch?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And also, will the people pay for it? You know, that's
Yes.
again really interesting. People becoming more attuned to this kind of environmental work, and yeah, paying a bit more for what they need to. Maybe a quick, if anybody has a quick question, or I suggest you put your questions in chat and we can follow them up later.